All right, guys. Tonight we're talking about two places, really. And if you're kind of following along here on our little map of where we're heading this semester with the whole Bible, tonight we're talking about Gethsemane and Golgotha. They're two real places. You could actually find them in the city of Jerusalem today. They're kind of commemorative locations. But the Garden of Gethsemane is where, after Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples, he goes to this garden and he prays. And that's what we're going to look at in Luke chapter 22 here in a second, is we're going to look at his prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. But from that garden, he's captured and he's brought before the Sanhedrin, which is kind of like a court, a Jewish court within the day. And they accuse him of blasphemy. They hand him over to the Romans. He goes before Pilate and undergoes another kind of trial under Pilate. And Pilate determines that he should be beaten and ultimately crucified. And he chooses a location. The location is called Golgotha. That's where the cross of Jesus was located. And Jesus died on that hill. And so from that prayer time to the time that he dies is really about a half a day. It's not a very long period of time, but we have a lot of information about it. And we celebrate at Easter time. We get to Easter Sunday and we celebrate his resurrection. And some churches, and maybe you guys have had this in the past, but some churches actually celebrate Good Friday. Good Friday really commemorates these moments, this time of prayer in the garden, the trials that Jesus underwent, and then ultimately his death on the cross. But what we were just talking about, what we were looking at from Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2 says that Jesus, he set aside the joy that was before him and he endured the cross. And sometimes I think, again, for us that are used to celebrating Easter and we go to church on Easter Sunday and we're all excited about the resurrection, and this was, some 2,000 years ago, we forget how significant those two places would have been. And we forget how much Jesus endured in those two places. Sometimes when I'm asking people how they're doing, we'll kind of funnel in on three different areas. We'll say, hey, how are you doing physically? Like, are you getting enough sleep? Do you like, is it good being outside? Are you eating well? You feel rested? Do you feel strong? Like, you'll start to ask those kind of physical questions. Sometimes when you say, how are you doing? You mean like emotionally, like, are you excited? Are you hopeful? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? Sometimes when we're asking, hey, how you doing? We mean like relationally, like, hey, are your friends doing well? Are you in a good place? Are you surrounded by good people? When we talk about Jesus enduring the cross, it may be the most painful physical experience anybody has ever endured. It may be the most painful emotional experience anyone has ever endured. And it may be the most painful relational experience anyone has ever endured. So when we read Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, it says that Jesus endured the cross. I don't know if we always understand how much he really endured. So I think sometimes, again, we get the pain side of it because we're like, wow, that must have really hurt. It hurt so bad he died from the injuries that he sustained. But think about it emotionally, or think about it relationally for a second. Like, he had just been celebrating and eating with his best friends. And then within a few hours of that meal, all of his best friends abandoned him. He was left all alone. He was betrayed by one of his closest companions. In the midst of walking his own cross, in the midst of walking his own death device to the place where he would die, he had to pass by his own mom. Like the relational and the emotional pain that Jesus endured in Gethsemane and on Golgotha are probably more than we could even imagine. And Jesus knew this. He wasn't surprised by this. Throughout his ministry, he had been saying that the Son of Man would be betrayed by those closest to him. He began to say that those around him would deny even knowing him. He began to say things like, I'm going to be handed over to other people who are going to mock me and ultimately kill me. And then he would say things like, and on the third day, I'll raise from the dead. But in that garden, in Luke chapter 22, if you look with me at verse 41, when Jesus was there before all of his friends kind of dispersed and abandoned him, it says in verse 41 of Luke 22 that Jesus withdrew about a stone's throw away, and he knelt down and he prayed and he said, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me. Just think about that for a second. In the garden, before Jesus pulled off Easter, he prayed and asked God if he could get away without doing it. Like that's the anticipation of what he knew was coming. He says, God, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. But then immediately after that, he says, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him so that he could endure what he was about to undergo. Verse 44 says that being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Have you guys ever been so nervous about something you start sweating? You know, like maybe your hands, your armpits, or even like sometimes like if I get really nervous, I get like a belly sweat going and there's like a patch of sweat that just forms right in the middle. Like we know what it feels like when you're anticipating something and your body starts to react to it. You start to get nervous about it. Jesus was in such agony thinking about what he was about to endure that actual capillaries in his body, probably in his head, began to burst. And the blood that would come from his pores would mix with the sweat, so much so that he would be sweating drops of blood. That's what he knew what was coming, and that's what was happening. And if you're like, does that really happen? Well, Luke, remember we talked about these gospel authors last week. Luke was a doctor. And Luke is the only perspective we have on the garden that says that Jesus' sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. So before anybody, punched him, before anybody, mocked him, before anybody crucified him, before he was even arrested, Jesus was in such agony that his sweat had become like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Again, I don't know about you guys, like I've gotten nervous about some stuff, but I've never gotten that nervous about it. And why was he doing this? What was he going through? Why was he going to endure the betrayal? Why was he going to endure the denial? Why was he going to endure the false trials? Why was he going to endure the mockery? Why was he going to endure the shame of being crucified? Why was he going to endure all of that pain? Well, John 15 verse 13 tells us he's doing it all to demonstrate his great love for us. That's what John 15 verse 13 says. It says that greater love has none than this, that someone would lay down their life for their friends. So when we think about all that Jesus endured, all the physical, emotional, and relational pain, we don't think about all of that stuff so that we feel bad about ourselves or feel like super guilty or like, oh, we must be the worst that Jesus had to go through such a hard thing. What we recognize is that Jesus went through such a hard thing because he cares so deeply for you, because he cares so deeply for us. You and I know that probably the things we're most willing to endure are the things we care the most about. The things we're most willing to endure are often the things that we care the most about. We'll undergo great pain if we care enough about what we're trying to accomplish. Jesus cared so much about you and so much about me, so much about the world, that he laid down his life for us. He endured the cross so that he could defeat death. That's the gospel. That's the good news. God loves you so much, he's defeated death so that you and I can live with him forever. That's the hope that we have in Jesus. That's what we believe. That's what we profess. That's what we celebrate each year at Easter. The movement from Gethsemane through Golgotha and into eternity. And so we're going to go back to our group for a little bit tonight. And I just want you to think about this from a little more perspective, a more personal perspective. How does seeing the events of these couple of days and thinking about everything from this half day, how does seeing that half day how does it help you better understand the vast love that God has for us? How do you better experience his love for us, having recognized everything he endured? So let's back up into groups, and we'll talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll spend the rest of the night just kind of hanging out.